Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and, well, the meaning of everything. At the corner by the fire are three people. One of them is trying really hard to decide if a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And that's me, Evangeline Denmark. And welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to help you connect the great story, the great stories, and our own story in order to understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. Today we're going to have a discussion on one of the most fundamental building blocks of the Christian imagination, a grasp of symbols and symbolic language. I have definitely bitten off more than I can chew with this topic, so I've asked my brother, Dr. John Case Tompkins, to be a co-host with me. If you're a listener of the show, you've heard my brother discuss medieval literature, RPG games, and most recently, Tolkien and elves on the podcast. So welcome, Dr. John Case Tompkins.
Happy to be here.
Who goes by many names.
Yes.
But I call him Case.
That's fine. That also works.
So I have wanted to have this conversation with these people, my special guest co-host and our special guest, for quite a while. One of my favorite things to do is to sit back and listen to people whose opinion I really respect discuss a topic that's really interesting to me. So I am kind of hoping I can step out of the light and let these two people discuss. Our guest today is one of my most favorite people in the world. Brandy Vallance is an award-winning novelist, writing mentor, and coach, international publishing specialist, and most recently, literary agent. She happens to be my best friend and critique partner of many years. She has a masterful command of symbolic language and metaphor, and she builds a mean campfire. Welcome to the podcast, Brandy.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
She does build the best campfire of anybody I have ever seen.
That is a rare skill.
It is. It's something to behold. I'm referencing a couple of evenings we spent at a plantation, staying in a inn there by the plantation, right. And we had a room with a fireplace.
Middleton Place Inn when you came and visited me, and by your own admission, you would probably die in an apocalypse. But since I have all of the survival skills, I could keep you alive. So I was the one building the fire and tending it that evening.
Exactly.
Someone has to do it.
So yes, that's why we're best friends, just in case. You have to have these people in your life who can build fires and keep you alive. We can talk about the symbolism of fires. So I just want to kick off with this question, and then we can let this go however we want. We can let this discussion take its own course. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the question: do we think that our culture has lost, to some degree, an understanding of the symbolic? And by that I mean how we interpret symbols, our awareness of symbols, our ability to use them, to make meaning, to understand meaning, kind of all that area. Case, do you want to take a stab at answering that question?
Well, I mean, I think that question requires that you unpack a lot of priors about the question. So first you have to ask, what is a symbol? And then if you look at symbol as itself, human beings make symbol just by being human. We, in some sense, understand the nature of reality because of our capacity to symbolize, that is, to take physical reality and apply meaning to it. And we do this all the time. So the question, have this society lost track of symbols, is it's almost a sort of a non-starter. We can't think without symbols. I think maybe the question that might be closer would be something like, have we lost a shared symbolic language? And I think that is something that we really could dig into. But I am curious, Brandy, as a writer, one of the things that is most, or at least it seems to me to be most true about writing, not being a writer myself, is that the finding of symbol is exactly that. When you're writing a story, you are writing a story and sort of digging meaning out of the paper, and then only later going back to it do you think, oh, I recognize this. Am I close to the mark there or far off?
I think you're close. And I might even go one step further and say we have lost symbol, but it's more because we've lost community. And we have gravitated from the time when people used to sit around on the porches and they used to talk about the sky and how the sky looked and what their weather was going to be. So it's in that tragedy of losing our community, perhaps we're only in survival mode. And it's not that we have lost the ability to look at symbol. It's just that we need to get out of survival mode and we need to get back into community. And then if our souls can relax, then we can start to witness the symbolic again and see the deeper meanings.
Yeah. I think that, you were talking about coming back to our writing and looking for symbols or recognizing symbols. I think we're both you guys are both hitting on something similar in what Brandy said and then what you said coming back. It's part of it is having a moment to breathe and
Right.
a moment for your brain to relax and for your imagination to take hold. So I think that's interesting that you both mentioned sort of a break, a breather, a reprieve in time. And maybe that's part of, our inability or our, we just don't have time. We just don't have time
Exactly.
to stop and smell the roses, which
Exactly.
would they smell as sweet? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
And creativity takes work. So it takes
Yeah.
space.
Mm-hmm. So interpretation of creativity also takes work.
Yeah, there is well, okay. So when I said that we make meaning, we do make meaning all the time. And this meaning, you can think of any sort of activity that you would do, either mentally or physically or whatever, makes meaning in a number of different ways. So we create symbols out of physical reality, and this is fundamental to the understanding of symbology. I could make some book references if you want, like a primer in understanding symbolic language, but the idea basically is that we have physical matter, which represents, in the kind of ancient conception, sort of being without form, right? So unutilized potential, the earth in the classic Genesis narrative, and then we have pure concept, understanding, intellect without form, heaven in the biblical narrative. And what happens when symbol is created, and the word symbol simply means meeting place.
Does it?
Yeah.
I love that.
Meeting place. It's a Greek
That's
word.
so
It means
good.
meeting place. Yeah. And what you happen is you have unformed potential and you have concept, and they meet together and form meaning. And this is how we understand the world as it is created, or at least that's how the traditional um, representations of the creation understand. That is, matter without form is made to have form by the infusion of heaven into that form, the breathing of life into clay.
I love that.
So
Mhm.
That's the fundamental structure of reality from a symbolic perspective. Now, we do this all the time and we don't think about it. So, for instance, if you're, you got a couple of boys and they want to play kickball or something like that, what's the first thing they do? They go out into a field and say, okay, that tree over there is one goal, and this tree over here is another goal. So I have, in order to facilitate my activity, playing kickball, I have made meaning out of what was, at least for me, previously a meaningless field. Now it has meaning because I've drawn shapes around it. I've made it concrete. We do this all the time. Um, even something as simple as like I'm going, taking a trip to the store is impossible without the the meaning that we place on top of the activity. So we drive to the store, but we don't just get in our car and see where the steering wheel takes us, right?
Well, I don't know about you.
We follow a mental path that we've either gone by, or maybe we follow something on a GPS or something like that. We follow a path to the store. So we make meaning onto the roads that lead us to the place where we want to go. And then when we're in the store, we have a list. So we have this gigantic store with all of these things in it. We can't just walk in, turn right, and start buying things. That doesn't get us to
Are
what
you
we
sure?
want. We have a list. That list both excludes, right, and includes. Here are the things I do need. Here are the things I do not need. So it shapes our shopping, and it it brings us towards our goal, which is, bring home the food we wanted to bring home. So we do that all the time. But the thing that I think you both were talking about is this idea that we don't have a kind of we don't have a shared communal symbology in a way that we perhaps might like. And so, we might think of older cultures, or maybe not even that's not even necessarily fair. Different cultures, right? It is one of the things that you will hear from people who go to more ancient cultures than ours. That I did not realize that I was offending someone by doing this thing, right? Or I want to be careful to walk in the right ways or do the right things. This tells us that we are treading into someone else's symbolic language, their symbolic world, and we have to, the fear that we might misstep tells us that we have entered a world that we do not recognize, but yet very definitely exists. So it might be that shared understanding that you are both lamenting.
Or maybe even just a recognition of the sacred within, symbols, within meaning making. That there is something higher than even just the meaning that we put on our everyday activities, which we're not even aware of.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is something that you could probably, I would say, both of you as experienced writers could say something about, in the sense that, why we read fiction. Like, what does fiction provide us? Very rarely do we get fiction that is, even fiction that claims to be slice of life is very rarely just slice of life. It is, here are people who are involved in a world and they have a story to tell, right? That the idea of a story itself is the making of meaning out of time. We take time, a chunk of time, and it can mean nothing. But if we ourselves interpret it, this happened, which leads to this, which leads to this, that gives us narrative. And, you know, I imagine you're both writers because you first loved reading. And I would imagine that, well, again, I don't know because I'm not a writer, but my feeling as a reader has always been that that particular kind of pleasure that happens when the climax of the story is not. It is not. Sometimes it can be surprising, but it is fitting.
Mm.
Like the story arrives at the place that it should. And it might arrive in a surprising way, or there might be some twists and turns, but that feeling that, yes, this is how it should be. And I did not know until I arrived at this page, at this scene, that this was exactly how it could be. But now that I am here, it can be no other way. It must be this story in this particular way. And again, I'm not a writer, but if you have had that feeling in reading, I imagine it is even compounded in writing, where you might be watching characters come together, come apart, move towards one thing or another, their goals, and at a certain point, they simply must be where they end up. That's, I mean, you tell me.
Those are definitely the divine moments that seem like they're so much bigger than us. And many
Yeah.
times Evangeline and I have spoken, and so we don't know how it all came together, but it somehow just did. And we don't know why we place symbols in certain places, but then, it all connected 10 chapters later. And I just like to think that that is, you know, true divine inspiration, because we know our capacity as we're writing. We know how tired we are and
Yes.
what we're working with most of the time. So that's part of the beauty of it. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about how I grew up. I was raised by my grandmother, so I came from a much just older view of the world. And even the way that she used to sit around with her sisters and talk. And particularly, it was Kentucky and Southern Ohio. So lots of metaphor, lots of simile, lots of symbol, and especially in humor, which was just fantastic. So that's part of what I love about, just those generations and that part of America.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, in reference to that, um, I imagine that a lot of that humor, at least the way I'm familiar with it, is these these kind of like comparisons. They're usually
Mhm.
natural comparisons, like you know, uh, he's happier than pig and poop, right? um, and
Gross.
right, yeah, and there are a bunch of them, and I think some people would call them Southernisms in some
Right.
cases, but that language that itself is indicative of, again, that kind of meaning making with the tools that you have to hand, right? So
Mhm.
humans are just always going to make meaning. And when your experience is primarily rural and sort of natural, what you do is see the world around you, but then there is that natural desire to make meaning out of it. And so that turns into these odd sort of personifications
Mm.
where we ascribe emotion or attitude or characteristics to animals that, you know, thinking from a purely materialistic standpoint, don't have those things. But it is why we have this association of like the fox with cleverness,
Mhm.
or the bee with hard work, and um, those, a pig with laziness, right, or dirtiness, right? There's all of these. Um, Again, you would call them natural symbols because they arrive naturally. So that's the real when we're talking about this linguistically, that's the real difference between those sorts of story derived symbology and the kind of thing that I was describing earlier with the two boys playing kickball, right?
Mhm.
So we've established goals. Those are artificial symbols, right? They exist only for those boys, and they exist only as long as the kickball is being played in that park. And then they vanish. The boys
Mhm.
leave that night. A pair of lovers is striding through the park. They don't know anything about like these trees as goals or bases or anything like that. That has left, right?
Mhm.
The tree does its own kind of symbolic talking to everybody, but that's a natural symbol. So, right. And so, what I think is interesting about what you do as writers is sort of finding natural symbols and pulling them out, right?
Mm.
So, you might start a story with a person. There's this person, and I want to know what happens to him or her. And perhaps, and I don't know, but halfway through the writing, or maybe a quarter way on the second revision, it's like, oh, this is a Mary figure. I didn't know that.
Mhm.
Obvious now. So I don't know.
That talking about personification and sort of the natural symbol versus the made symbol,
Artificial symbol, yeah.
artificial, yeah. Brandy actually has taught a workshop on personification and metaphor, and so that's one of the things that she does very well in her writing. And so I'm curious, like, do you, because you talked a little bit about, like, we get to one point and we look back and we're like, well, I don't have any idea how that got there. But I know that you do craft, your like metaphorical weather or whatever it is. So in that moment when you're working on that, um, what does that process look like for you? I mean, for me, it's kind of a like sitting and thinking about, well, what conveys the emotion that I'm looking for. But do you go deeper, like with something besides emotion, or like, are you thinking about meaning in that when you're crafting those?
As we're talking, I think it stems back to just me being steeped in Southern culture because everything is a story and everything is looked at as there's more behind this than what we know. And it's almost like an invitation into the supernatural. Every storm, every odd occurrence, everything that goes wrong on the farm has to have an explanation. And there was just space made for the larger story, the better. And particularly with humor too, it's almost like in Southern thought, which just comes natural to people who are in the South. But the crazier the things are, and they shouldn't go together, if you put them together, it's all the better. And
Hmm.
as I'm writing and thinking, it's almost just like levels, and it's probably some form of synesthesia that I might have, just the interconnectedness, but everything is connected. And as I think about it, everything can be equated to biblical themes, to attributes of God. I mean, there isn't anything I look at in this room that I couldn't say God is like that, or here's how this relates to this story in the Bible, or here's how this relates to, redemption or humanity. Or it's almost like, if, with my mind at least, if unless I stop it, it'll just keep going. So that's how it is for me.
I love that. I think that you're perhaps unique, and that is in that way, and in I think that's the storyteller's gift. That it just keeps going and keeps going, because I'm thinking, like, that's the clue, that's the tool, the like layers, and to have the foresight or the understanding to continue to pull back the layers, like, a mountain is a lofty place. It's a symbol of something high. There's a mountaintop experience that you can have. So you might have a mountain in your story that people climb and something very important happens there. And then you go further and you realize that mountains often symbolize the dwelling of the gods. There's the verse in the Psalms, where do I go for my help, or where do I look for my help? I look to the hills.
Yes.
And then also, the Greeks, of course, with Olympus, the dwelling of the gods, so it's like, it's the willingness to continue to peel back layers and to
Exactly.
continue to go deeper. And I think, like, when we're writing, perhaps the first metaphor or the first, use of symbolic language kind of comes from that, I can't remember, artificial and natural, kind of comes from that natural place. And then kind of the art, the craft is going deeper, like using that as you unfold the scene, to deepen the meaning of the scene by continuing to go back to that symbol, that image, like, for instance, the mountain, as your characters get higher, more things begin to happen, or they begin to have better understanding, or, something like that.
We have to remember that the novel is, all things considered, a relatively new form of entertainment. It's barely a couple hundred years old. And so we're still sort of figuring it out as a species.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that, but then, yeah, you're right. Because, before, we didn't have language, and then we had language, and we had oral storytelling, and then we learned writing, and that has been relatively recent.
It's called a novel because it's new. It's a new way of being entertained. But the thing about the novel is that it asks us, or gives us, an opportunity to experience a longer form story, right? So we are introduced to characters. We see how they progress, and we are usually given points of view or ideas about how they are thinking and feeling, which is true in other types of literature, but this is a solitary experience. And then we are led towards some end, some climax, or some resolution that that we share sort of with the characters, but those characters are, generally speaking, supposed to be relatable, right? This is one of the things that people always talk about. It's like, well, I really couldn't get into the main character. It's just there's nobody there for me to relate to. As if anybody is relating to Macbeth. Like, that's not supposed to relate to me. Like, please don't. So it's a different type of experience, but so maybe we're still sort of figuring out how symbolism works inside a novel. But all forms of literature, right, you could say even all forms of art, point towards some ideal that they are going towards, right? And you can see this everywhere. If you want to just talk about painting, whether we're talking about, somebody doing a classical sculpture of a god, right? We are trying to find from that physical thing, the marble, that perfection that represents some ideal. And in the same way, this is always interesting when you read Shakespeare speeches. Anytime a character gives a speech, like anything longer than a couple of lines in a Shakespeare play, they invariably end on a proverb. So they will say what they're thinking or telling, but they'll end on a proverb. And that's not because Shakespeare is really just wants you to learn some good Latin epigrams. No. It is because his audience expected that. They expected there to be a kind of summation that the character is talking around something that is meaningful for that character. but it will lead ultimately to some universal realization that this is how the world is, or this is what we ought to think about, you know? And it's one of the things that makes Polonius in Hamlet so ridiculous, because all he does is give you proverbs. All of his speeches are just proverb after proverb after proverb. So he's just all kind of surface, and there's no depth to him. That's why it's always funny. People, I see these, like, you get these mugs. You see these mugs, they're like, "To thine own self be true," Shakespeare. It's like, yeah, but that was the guy you're not supposed to listen to. He was the character, the dumb guy that you're not supposed to listen to. So,
I do not think that word means what you think it means.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're always, I don't know. What you guys do is so interesting, because you're pulling symbolism from matter.
From nothing.
Well, no.
Not
matter.
really nothing.
Pages,
Yeah.
Marks on a page.
Yeah.
But you're doing that with, most of the time, an individual. You're not presenting it to an audience, except on a one-on-one thing. Like, I am reading a book. And the very, 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 very few cases where I might be reading aloud to a group of people, then it might be a little different. But for the most part, I am talking to you. Here is my story about what happened to this person, and I want to tell you what happened. But then, because of the nature of reality, we pull these things out, and you start to see these things. And that's why I was sort of interested in the, we talk about metaphor, like just the revising process. Like, I would imagine, you tell me if this is not true, but I would imagine, Brandy, that, you might be dissatisfied at times with, a description, the sky is cloudy, or the weather was cold. And you're like, yeah, it's true, right?
But Brandy never writes the sky is cloudy.
Well, right, but I'm just wondering. I'm wondering, is that a pass, or do you get stuck?
That's a good question. Do you write the sky is cloudy on your first draft?
Rarely, but all of that
you need to know, right? Because it's not cloudy. It's not just cloudy.
Well, exactly.
No, I don't just. That's a total waste. You have to make the sky do something. You have to bring psychology into it. You have to bring meaning.
Because the sky's a character.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
For me, yes. Everything is a character when I write.
Right. That is your Southern speaking. But that is the whole point. That is that shared symbolic language. I don't know if we do like liner notes for this, but there is I think he's an early 20th century anthropologist. He's French, Lucien Levebru, who wrote a book called, I think the English title is something like The Primitive Mind. And in that book, he talked about the fact that in societies, like kind of primitive societies, that word didn't mean a negative meaning like it might for us today. In primitive societies, there is no death is natural. All deaths are the result of enemies that you can see or not, that interrupt a life that would have otherwise continued indefinitely. Now, we moderns, right? It's like, well, you just don't understand organic chemistry.
The circle of life.
But no, it's just that they understand a different. They are looking at the world symbolically,
right?
And they are actually correct, because all death is unnatural.
It is unnatural. Yeah,
it is not what we were.
Well, that is
designed for
Christian point of view, but yes.
Should we go that?
Yeah,
I'm thinking about like how we are compelled to make meaning, and what do you think, Brandy? Like, as authors, do you think that I mean, because I'm thinking that's not unique to us, really. Um, Maybe it's just the way that we do it.
Are you talking about like, do dolphins?
No, talking about humans.
Oh, okay.
I
Like
think
different types of humans.
within all humanity is the longing for otherness. And I think that's part of the reason for Symbol, is so we can believe that there is more. And in whatever context that might be, that there's more for our life, for our family, for our society, for whatever. What do you think about that?
Yeah, we were talking about that the other day, and because I was just kind of spitballing about why it is that I want to pull out of the way that the light is hitting a tree some deeper meaning, some supernatural, um not necessarily force, but just understanding. And you said that something similar, that we do all crave the other. We crave meaning.
Right.
I mean, not just the meaning that we make, that we understand, that gives us purpose, but bigger and more and deeper than we even recognize.
Right, and we have to. I mean, you could think of authors as people that do professionally what everyone does amateurly, right? So we all create stories of our lives, right? We can tell that storytelling is natural because we get frustrated with our children when they do it badly. like get to the point. Where are we going with this? Like, the fact that you can do something badly tells us that you can do something well, right? So we we all make meaning, and there's plenty of evidence in the field of the science of mind that tells us that every time we remember something, we remember it slightly differently, right? We polish memories. We sand off the rough edges. We make it a thing that we hold on to, right? And people do this all the time. They talk about. I had one of my stepsons recently had a very good date with his girlfriend. He talked about making a core memory, and I was like, "Where's this language come from?" But that's where that's it. That's what we do. And what's a treat about what you guys do is that you allow us to make memories that aren't ours, right? And this might be why, in some sense, we don't have, or we've lost that shared memory, is because much of our entertainment is individual, right? And not shared. I'll list two things here. One, the number of young people and middle-aged people I meet who are Star Wars fans, right? Just think about the number of people who are Star Wars fans. Why? Because it's a shared story. We all saw these together. And when we see some memory of that, it brings us back in, right? And in the same way, in perhaps an older fashion, getting hand-me-downs from family members, right? Receiving something that I have a school bell from my grandmother that she used to ring to call classes to order, right? So this is an ordinary copper bell and has no material value, or very little, but it has immense social value to me because it's a legacy of my family. And I know that is a part of Southern tradition and culture, Brandy.
I'm even
Right?
thinking, right, I'm even thinking about how we've lost symbology in architecture, and
Oh,
how,
don't get me started.
yes, right. I mean, just simple leaves, just simple depictions of nature that had meaning even as far back into antiquity for reason and story. And for the belief that you would be found in the darkness because there is a dogwood tree, on this depiction of this building, and we can remember these things. So
Mhm.
that's something that I mourn is just the loss of symbology in our everyday.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, think about the building of the cathedrals, all of the symbolism that goes into
Mhm.
the building, the actual structure, but also, thinking about the guilds and the craftsmen and the community building such a thing. Getting back to what you were saying about community, about sharing. I think that's a perfect symbol. Haha. Sorry, I didn't mean to do
Sorry,
that.
it's natural. It's just what
Yeah,
happens.
it's the perfect representation of what we're talking about. Something that holds symbol, points to something else, and also is shared among community. And like
Yeah.
the the depth of the meaning, like I'm thinking when Notre Dame burned, how visceral it was. I've never been to Notre Dame, and how and our Anselm friends, we were all just sort of in shock and watching this unfold, and it's interesting, like some of us maybe have been there, probably most of us haven't, and yet how much meaning that had and
Mhm.
how much we shared that
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
It's the loss of symbol, which was the loss of story, which was the loss of history,
Mhm.
and just on and on and on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, simple is or story is you could think of story as simply symbol extended through time, right?
Mhm.
So we have we have the we have these stories that sort of exist sort of in space, things like cathedrals,
Mm.
right? But then we have symbols that exist sequentially. Those are our stories, right? So we and we use both of them. I like the thing I like about thinking about cathedrals, other than it is just a nice thing to think about cathedrals, is thinking about the ways in which they are sort of diachronic symbols, right? So they have meaning that changes over time, and because they are buildings that don't, like most modern buildings have a 50-year lifespan and then they're going to get torn down, and right, cathedrals are built to last, right? And um, they're always going to be there for us to look at, or at least from the community perspective, they're always going to be there for us to see and read in the sense that we can. Because, of course, if you are versed in symbolic language, you can read symbols even if you can't read print. Um, and so this stuff lasts, and it anchors a town, and so anchors a community, right? So our symbol is in our midst and is always something that we can read and reference because it is there. We can see it. It is the central point of our life, and it shapes everything that we see. One of the things that is interesting about language, just when you just the word symbol itself, if you go to, I'd say, any sort of high to mid level, even Protestant church, you'll at some point recite the Apostles' Creed. If you go to an older traditional Christian church, like Orthodox, some Catholic churches do this. I think the word is slightly similar in Coptic. They'll say, "Now we will recite the symbol of our faith,"
Hmm.
right? Because this is the thing that makes this is the thing that gives our faith shape. This Here is what we believe. It is the shape of our faith. Um, so, um, yeah, we need, the more we are surrounded by symbol, the more we are able
Mm.
to think in symbol, and the more we are separated from symbol, or the more that our symbology is individual, the less we are able to think symbologically. It's just language. It's a different type of language, and we don't have that shared language anymore.
So do you think it's, I'm trying to like extrapolate what that, what that means, to be surrounded by symbol, to be familiar with it. I mean, I guess it takes awareness.
I love those images of the cathedral and just how that equates to community and any symbols as far back into time just brings people together. So, could we say that the loss of symbol is most always a loss of community?
Yeah.
Well, like you connected them in the beginning. As you were talking about, you mentioned, stories that last through time. It just made me think of, the fairy tales that we have that are older even than written language, like Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
Cinderella almost.
They're all very old.
Very, very old. And so I was thinking about them and the symbols within them as stories that last through time. And then I was thinking about like wanting to make stories that last through time. And that's a big burden.
Well, but it's well, that I think that is a modern thing. I think that the design, maybe it is that wrapped up in that whole novel thing. It's like I have to tell a new story.
No,
you don't. What you want to do is tell an old story in a new way,
yeah,
or just a different. And I mean, this is Chaucer will tell you this. Chaucer says, "All I'm trying to do is tell the story as best I can from the masters I learned it from." And so it is not my job to create new symbol. I'm just passing on symbol. I am handing it down because I was given it, and it's my job to give it on.
That makes me think of what Brandy says, which is, tell me what it means to be human. That's something that she, that's what I want in the story, is tell me what it means to be human. And I think that is what we do when we make symbol.
Exactly. What it means to be human in 19th century, Vanuatu is a lot different than 20th century Minnesota. So,
Right.
yeah.
But it's still the same. I mean, there's some things that are still the same. Like, when he was saying that pressure to create something new. I mean, that's something that, both Brandy and I have, having been in the writing world. But I don't really feel that anymore. Do you? I mean, when you're approaching a story, is that something that you feel now, Brandy?
No, because I think that the best stories are just telling universal truths. So as long as we're dealing in universal truths of love and loss and redemption and friendship and, the whole list, that then those are intertwined with symbols anyway, as far back into antiquity and will be as far forward. So as long as we just stick to universal truths, that the symbols come along naturally and the stories kind of, they just organically appear.
Yeah.
They're the ones that we say, read this book because you want to share it with somebody, or like you were saying, Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. The things that are in there that are universal and that are core, that make it a shared experience.
A shared experience, but also a kind of they do create a sort of universal value, right? In the sense that those of us who know and tell this story, it tells us who we are and tells us what we hold up as highest, what we value, what we put aside, and and telling it again. There's no shame in that. That is the thing that you should be doing. That is the storyteller's job. It's like, I receive these stories and now I'm giving them to you. And the stories are the things that hold the symbols, and you sort of almost don't have to worry about them. Like, the symbols will do their job as long as you are being true to your story. Like, to if you, I am sure this has happened to you as writers, like you work yourself into a corner with a character and you realize, wait a minute, that's not what this person would do, right? I missed something about them, or I have to revise or something like that, or that, and that's just you learning what that human is, right? And it's like, oh, well, now I need to tell the story better because I didn't do it right the first time. There's plenty of opportunity to screw up.
Oh yeah.
So.
I was just thinking about the scene, Brandy, that you have, the opening scene in Within the Veil, and how the character's father, Faya, right?
Right.
Her father is bricking up the windows.
Mm-hmm.
And what a rich symbol that is of the loss of freedom, of despair, the loss of light. And it just that just stands out to me as such a rich example of using symbol in an opening scene that like immediately connects you with the character and gives you emotion. I don't know.
Well,
Did you, when you wrote that scene, were you thinking about that, or did it just happen because it's magic?
Well, it sort of just happened. I saw that when I was in Scotland. I stumbled across that bit of history and couldn't get it out of my mind. But if you really think about it, her father was dealing with alcoholism. So the breaking up of the windows is, I always try to put the emotions of my character externally into whatever's happening. So that's her being bricked up, her feeling like there's no escape, her feeling like her father will never have a breakthrough. So, and it just goes on and on and on. And I think that the more symbols you can put in metaphor or your scenery or in anything, that the stronger it's going to be. If you can back up everything with psychology and emotion and allow your reader to experience your story on a subliminal level without them knowing why they're feeling certain things, that makes for a really powerful experience.
Yeah, the subliminal, the subconscious, that's something that has always fascinated me, thinking about how we have these sort of universal, maybe not, um, ideas about certain things that I feel like they're there before they're even given words.
Mhm.
Um, like for instance, the ocean and as being birthplace of life, water as life, light as life. Um, and it's just so powerful and just so interesting to me that you can sort of hack through someone's resistance and kind of go straight to their subconscious in when you just use you just reference light, or you reference water. And I just think that's fascinating, and it just is an example of how ubiquitous, I guess, symbol is, and how, I mean, I'm not good at expressing, but I always think
Oh, that isn't true at all.
maybe on the page, not so much when I speak. But symbol is everything. Meaning is everything. Words,
It
language
Right,
are
and just
everything.
think about all the symbols that are on the megaphone to you just as you drive down the street, the signs, the colors. I mean, subconsciously, what is the weight of that? What are our souls absorbing just by the advertising? Because it's specifically in advertising, people get paid a lot of money to know what colors make people feel certain ways and then buy certain things. So, as authors, we need to make that work for us as well. And that is something that I try to do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There's a great deal of uh, yeah, symbol is everywhere, which means that it's not so much a matter of like using symbol, or like creating symbol, but sort of like using symbol um, judiciously. You know, we have to conserve and use the symbols in the way that uh, don't trash them, don't drag them through the mud. You know, like try and try and tell the story true.
Mhm.
Um, and um, yeah, it's easy to get flashy and miss the real thing that's
Right.
hiding, right?
You have to have
So
the craft and the technique there first before you attempt to to do those deeper and loftier things. Otherwise, it'll
right,
just be a disaster.
right. But those deep and lofty things can come, thankfully, because we are using this universal language. They can come um, uh, as we work. One of my favorite lines from an author is the first line from the foreword to The Lord of the Rings, which is simply, "This tale grew in the telling."
Mm.
Yes, it did.
Mhm,
Yes, it
mhm,
did.
mhm,
And it grew up and it grew down. Um, it found great roots and it reached great heights. And your tale
mhm,
will grow in the telling. That's
mhm,
tell more tales, you will tell them better.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's the truth and the core of what we do as novelists. And when we get to that point where we're like, I don't really know how uh, this this metaphor, this symbol, this I don't know how this happened. It's in here, and I don't know how it got there. It's
mhm,
because it grew in
yeah,
the telling.
because it's natural.
Mhm.
Natural things grow.
And going back
So
to the start of the conversation, just about the inability to relax or to have our souls at ease, I think the more we can get into that space and our souls can relax, our spirits can relax, we will see more and the symbols will grow in depth.
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I just wanted to talk a little about in closing was just, how we um, can cultivate an awareness of symbol. But I think that we've already touched on it in talking about this, you know, take a moment and breathe and relax. And, I'm thinking of that time that we spent together in Charleston by the fire and the like wonderful conversations that we had that came out of that space, the
Mhm,
safety and the warmth and the space. And, the fire, of course, a symbol of warmth and life and
mhm,
inspiration.
inspiration. Yeah. um and so I'm just thinking, like, building those moments in more intentionally in our lives for our children, as authors, for our audience. That's what it's about, is slowing down and building in those spaces.
Well, it's not about slowing down so much as learning or relearning to think in cyclical time.
Hmm.
Because any this is true of all um, you know uh, Christian religions, or at least most of them, to some degree or another. But any religion has a cyclical understanding of time. There are high days and low days. There are times for fasting. There are times for feasting. Um, and we tell the same story every year because we are we are thinking symbolically about the passage of time, rather than time as an arrow going someplace towards something that we don't know and may not want. Um, to ground ourselves in cycles, to ground ourselves in regularity and order, um, and to retell
Mhm.
um, is part of how we recover that symbol, because it's the only way we can share things.
Mhm.
So
Well, I still think that maybe I just want it to be about slowing down because I'm tired.
yeah, it is after Christmas, so
Yeah.
we're all a little.
Yeah, but Brandy and I were talking about Advent, a while ago, and about the time of of longing, of leading up to Christmas. And the wonderful things about high church tradition is that we are now in Christmas tide. So Christmas for us is not over. It is Christmas tide. It is the time of celebration and, I think, relaxation, hopefully. This is the time, and it makes me sad to look at a culture and a world that's like, oh, December the 26th is such a sad letdown day. It's like, no, we're still in Christmas. This is still celebration time. This is still, relaxation, and give yourself room to feast and to have community.
Yeah. If you're old church Russian, you haven't even had Christmas yet. It's not till January.
That's true. Yeah. Yep, we have Epiphany as well.
Yep.
So, well, Brandy, do you have any other closing thoughts about just maybe the purposeful?
Like we're going to finish this conversation.
I know, yeah, listeners, this conversation will never be done, but we do have time constraints, so we will not be here for 3 hours. But yeah, closing thoughts about Symbol, about being purposeful with it, anything like that.
I tend to believe that all humans are naturally creative, and the more we are able to cultivate our ability to see and to relax, as you're talking about, the more we will see, and the more we will know, and the more we will be able to connect symbols. So that's my closing thought.
She agrees with me.
Oh,
we just need more
good.
time. We need to relax.
Sure.
Closing thoughts from you, Dr. Tompkins.
I can give a couple of recommendations. Anyone who's interested in following up on the formal study of symbols should read The Trivium by Sister Miriam Joseph. They should read The Symbolic World what is it called? The Language of Creation by Mathieu Pajot. And follow the YouTube series The Symbolic World by his brother Jonathan Pajot, who gives great short courses in recovering symbolic language. So if you want to know more, those are excellent places to get more information.
Very true. And I cannot recommend Brandy's books enough. They are Within the Veil and The Cover Deep. The Cover Deep is first. They're not in order, but The Cover Deep was her debut novel, and Within the Veil, her most recent novel. Brandy, let our listeners know where they can find you online.
They can go to brandyvallance.com.
All right. Short and sweet. Brandy Vallance, that the last name is Vallance.
Mm-hmm.
All
and
right.
Brandy
Things
with a
are
Y.
winding. Oh, yeah. Brandy with a Y, not with an I. Yeah.
Very important.
Yes. Things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire is down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. If you have a moment in what we call time, please rate and review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.